you'll notice that it's a little bit up and down, but it was generally climbing. We got a drop off last year. So this is the percent of LPEA services with PV installed. You can see that as of last year, PV was just a little over 2%. And one of the questions that we kind of had was, what are the limits on PV? What could we conceivably handle? How many houses and buildings could actually generate PV? And so, you know, we don't know if that's 2%, 20%, 100%, what it is. So we looked at that question. This is PV on the bottom compared to overall residential sales. Again, very small at this point. And so I'm going to make some graphs here. You've actually seen the first graph in a slightly different form about 6 months ago. But I'm going to look at the base solar case here, which says that LPEA rates will increase 1% a year. Okay, that was based kind of on what Tri-State's charging us, and you know, trying not to get too terribly complicated about it, but then also our costs that have to go up as we go along. The solar rates are based on the Tri-State presentation that they gave us last spring. Okay, so that's the second bullet point. The solar rate decrease is based on the Bloomberg New Energy Outlook report from 2017. Again, you saw that when I did my presentation 6-8 months ago. The existing PV tariffs are included, and we're assuming that the net metering is pretty much the same as what we have today. So this is a graph where the top bar is what we're charging residential rate right now, going up 1% a year. Okay? And then the bottom is the cost of rooftop solar rates with the tariffs built in. So you see how it kind of jumps up in 2018, then starts coming back down as the other costs, besides the tariff, as the tariffs start to roll off, the other costs come down. And so you end up pretty much in 2026 with the ability to put rooftop solar on at about half of what LPEA would be charging. So again, this is, when you talk about the cost of the solar, it's basically the cost of the system divided by the number of years, number of kilowatt hours that you expect from that. And again, that's based on, this 10.3 number was the one that Tri-State gave us. So everything else is based from that. Now, this does not mean, and you can see when you get out here in 2040, you're at about 3.5 cents for solar and almost 16 cents from LPEA. This does not mean that you could get off the grid at this point, because we'll look at that in a minute. You need storage in order to get off the grid. But you can see where there's an increasing incentive for people to start producing more and more of their energy from solar as opposed to buying it from LPEA. It's just standard economics. Okay? And the only thing that we can really do to change this, change that incentive, is to somehow to bring that number down, the one on the top. Because this is not, you know, unless something really weird happens, these numbers are not going to start going up. But the incentive is going to be there for people to get off, not totally off the grid, but to reduce the amount of energy they're buying from LPEA and substitute solar for that. And this is residential and commercial incentives are about the same. Unless we can do something to bring that upper bar down to where the difference between what we're charging and what they can get solar for changes. Yes?
Well, in order for LPEA to survive, we're going to have to start charging for our services. I mean, we have to pay our bills too at LPEA. So if we're going to provide backup power lines and everything, then they can't use the system for free in my mind. All the rest of us pay for it.
Right. The thing you have to think about there, in addition to what you said, which is absolutely true, is as you start to increase the cost that you're charging the customers to provide backup power, now you get more and more incentive for them to add storage and get completely off the grid.
So if they get completely off, that's fine.
Well, but the impact on LPEA is that our sales really start dropping. So that's, and again, I'm not trying to say this is good, bad, or indifferent. This is just what the numbers show. And so it's something we need to be thinking about and saying, what is the impact of this on us? And I don't know that at the moment. I couldn't tell you whether this is by the time you get out here, it's a 15% drop in residential sales or 75% drop in residential sales. But it's the sort of thing that I think we need to be looking at as we go forward.
So I think this chart is a bit misleading, and that is that you look at that and you think, well, if you get solar in 2019, your price is going to continue to go down, but that's not true, because in 2019, that's, what is it, $20.09 or 10, I can't read, but
Where are you here?
$10.09.
10 cent,
So if you get in
10.09
at that
cents.
point, you're not going to ever get cheaper than that, because you bought in at $10.09.
Right.
And in fact, I think that will parallel the upper one, because you're going to have degradation of your solar panels. You're going to have more maintenance as the older it gets. So I think that's a really confusing chart that you have there, because it kind of gives you the idea that if you buy solar, it's going to keep getting cheaper and cheaper and cheaper.
Okay, and that's clearly not the intention, and I see what you're saying. What I would say is this is the incentive for somebody new to add solar. There's also a good bit of talk that, as the efficiency of solar panels keeps going up, that it may in fact at some point be worthwhile to replace the solar panels that you have in an existing system and thereby drive the cost down, even further. So it again kind of gets complicated, but yes, I mean, we're not saying that if I put in solar now, by 2029 my price will be 5.87 cents. That's clearly not the case. So, yes.
Does this assume the continuance of our current net metering policy?
Yes.
Thank you.
Sort of.
What do you mean, sort of? I mean, feel free to answer. I asked it to you, but I had assumed that this assumes that this is the continuance of our current net metering policy.
So the number on the solar is really what you pay for the system divided by what you expect in the way of kilowatt hours over the life of the system. Now, does that depend on our net metering policies?
You're valuing those kilowatt hours.
Well,
So the value of those kilowatt hours depends upon our net metering policy.
To me, yeah, but that's kind of a separate thing in the sense that if you have a system that's relatively small, you're probably not putting a lot onto the system. If you have one that's large, you're putting a lot more onto the system. And again, the number here is just, if it costs you $20,000 to put it in, and you generate whatever that is, kilowatt hours over the life, that's what it's costing you for each one of those kilowatt hours. Now, how you use that relative to LPEA and whether you're pushing more on or not is dependent on the current net meters.
So these are based
Net
on
metering policies. That's why I say it kind of depends.
installation costs as opposed to.
That's the installation cost as predicted by Tri-State in the beginning and Bloomberg as it goes along. So I mean, I know what you're saying, and Britt and I had a little bit of a discussion about this. How does the net metering policy play into that? And if in fact those numbers are just the installation cost divided by the number of kilowatt hours that you're going to generate.
So the downward slope of the number based on the Bloomberg Energy Outlook document, right? So did you have, so are those bars decreasing at the rate of predicted decrease in cost of solar panels from the Bloomberg report?
So really what I did was,
Because I mean, that's something that can continue to decrease, but the cost of installation, of course, is a whole lot more fixed and will likely go up over time. And so even with whatever percentage of the overall cost of an installation cost that can be attributed to solar panels,
yeah.
I mean, that can go down at a different rate than the cost of the actual installation itself.
So
I mean, those are humans on roofs.
right. And so what I expected from the Tri-State number was that was the total installed price per kilowatt hour over the life of the system. And what Bloomberg did was they said that the price would be here, and I just drew a straight percentage drop each month. So they don't have numbers for every one of these. But that includes the labor and everything. And I would also say, and I was talking to one of the Shaw brothers, they said back in the early days, when they were putting in the racking and so on to put the stuff in, they had to literally create it from scratch. They'd have to go out and measure it, cut the aluminum and, the whole bit. And of course now, as the manufacturers get more involved in this, they've got stuff that's already pre-made lengths. I mean, we cut several of them when we put mine in, but most of them just went in. And so I would contend that from an efficiency point of view, it may be that the cost to install will continue to go down. And the cost of the labor won't go down, you know, somebody's man hour, but the number of man hours it takes to put it in could potentially go down. So you bring up a good point there. And, you know, again, we kind of have to look at that. But this is supposedly taking all that into account. That's the installed price of the system divided by the number of kilowatt hours.
My understanding of the number that Tri-State came up with was that was a levelized cost of energy, which took in degradation, and it took in replacement, it took in failures. It was supposedly that kind of a number. The levelized cost of energy is the total cost of the system, counting everything, divided by the kilowatt hours, divided by the number of years, divided by the hours per year, to get a sense per kilowatt hour. So that the bottom line he's putting down, and I'm not real comfortable with how fast Bloomberg says it's going to decrease either, but that really isn't the point as much as it is a relatively low cost that's probably going to go down in the future at some rate. So that cost is totally independent of the rate. In other words, the lower stuff, that's independent of the rate structure. The upper one is the rate structure, which we do have control over.
But it's highly dependent on the continuance of our current net metering policy, where we take electricity in the daytime and swap it back, giving back on a kilowatt for kilowatt hour basis for electricity in the nighttime, correct?
Not the lower line is independent of anything else other than the installation cost and the money you get back on that system.
The money you get back, but when you calculate the money you get back on that system, it's entirely dependent upon the continuance of our one-to-one trade-off between electricity received and
It's not the
LPEA.
money you get back, it's the cost of that. If you paid no rate and you weren't even connected to the grid at all, how much is that electricity costing you per kilowatt hour over the life of the system? Not even connected to the grid at all. That's that number. If it costs $20,000 to put it in,
Okay.
and another $10,000 to maintain it,
Okay. Well, that 3.5 cents in 2039, that must include storage, and that's off the grid, because our rate on the top line, that includes electricity when it starts.
Yeah, we're gonna get, there's another slide, a couple slides coming up that talk about storage. The one thing I would say about Bloomberg is they said that they have underestimated the drop in prices every single time they've done this report. So prices have dropped faster than they have predicted every time they've done this.
one of these times they're going to be wrong.
Yeah. They're predicting that now. So, let's go on. When we were doing this, Dan Harm said, you know, this doesn't really give a full picture, because if you literally are driving people off the grid, they've got a whole different cost structure. So we said, okay, let's go look at that. So here's the assumption on this case. Same LPEA rate increase of 1% a year, same solar rates from the Tri-State presentation, same decreases according to Bloomberg. The existing PV tariffs are included. I'm now going to add in 3 Tesla 13.5 kilowatt hour Powerwall batteries. And the reason I chose 3 was, this is basically a 600K system. I chose 3 because I can now run my house or business or wherever for 48 hours without any power from the outside and without turning my generator on. Okay, so I'm trying to be, you know, fairly conservative here to say, you know, if you really want to be able to get off the grid, I mean, my system has generated almost no electricity the last 2 days because of the weather. So this one is designed to be able to go in and keep going at the same rate. Presumably, if you started losing your solar, you'd want to cut some things back, but I'm just assuming the same rate. You're still going to run the dishwasher and so on and so forth. And then a generator, 11 kW generator at $3,000 installed. And again, we're not really talking about the net metering rate structure here. So now, it's a whole different ballgame. So this is the LPEA rate, and that's the rate for, and this is a 10-year battery's life, by the way. I'm assuming that at 10 years you got to replace those batteries. Okay? So, you know, in 2018, it's going to cost you 51 cents a kilowatt hour to get completely off the grid. And even by the time you get out here to 2040, it's still a good bit more expensive to get off the grid than it is to stay on with LPEA. So that's, you know, that tells you that the way batteries are right now, you know, we're still a long ways away.
Is that to fix
No, this is using today's,
today's,
well,
Well, it
yeah,
says it's
I mean, as you go out, it does.
as you go out further, it does.
Yeah, as you go out, it does. Again, it's one of those things where I took the number that was right here and just kind of brought it down the same percentage each year.
Yeah.
But you can see even by 2040, you can't economically get off the grid.
So, in some of our discussions in the past about batteries, it was my understanding that the more times you charge and discharge a battery, it starts deteriorating. Where did you come up with the 10-year battery life?
That's basically the warranty that Tesla is providing. You remember when they did that one in Southern Australia, the great big system that they put in there? They guaranteed the batteries would last 10 years and that the performance would stay the same, that they would at least meet the minimum requirements on the batteries for over that 10-year period. So that's why I chose 10 years here. There is a 10-year warranty on that battery, on those Tesla Powerwalls. And so, you know, that's where that came from.
So is there any other information on batteries out there? I mean, is there some other examples?
Yeah, I mean, batteries are very much in flux right now. So
Yes.
there's a bunch of different types of batteries that people are developing, some of which might be cheaper, some of which may be more expensive. If you think about lithium ion, which is what the Tesla is, you know, the big thing about lithium ion is it's light compared to the amount of energy it stores. So if you're putting a battery in a car, you don't want a huge, heavy battery in there. You want something that's fairly light. Your cell phone or your computer or whatever, again, you want something that's light and relatively small. If you think about your house, you know, you don't necessarily need a light battery. You're going to probably set it on the ground somewhere. So there's all these other batteries that are out there, and we didn't try to get into, you know, all the details of this, but just, again, when Dan said you got to include storage in order to show what might drive people off the grid, the Tesla was just the easiest one to grab a hold of.
Yeah, I get the fact you had to use something to like do the battery thing, but I think you're absolutely right on the battery thing. I've been doing a lot of reading on it. The battery thing is very interesting, and it's very much in flux.
Yep.
I mean, the current lithium-ion battery, it's going to change. I mean, for one thing, they're trying to get the cobalt out of it, because most of the cobalt comes from the Congo, and the environmental and human consequences of mining it are vast. For another, it was an interesting article in the Wall Street Journal 3 or 4 months ago. It's actually worth looking up, and maybe I'll go find it and I can send it to you guys. But it's talking about the Frankfurt Auto Show. And they hung a banner that said, "Elon, it's your turn" at the Frankfurt Auto Show, because every one of the major automakers in the world announced, like Volkswagen said that within 5 years they'd be producing 50 different models of electric vehicles. And so what these auto companies did, I mean, the big guys, I'm not talking about the Mercedes-Benzes, the Volkswagens, the GMs, the Fords, is they went out and collectively they have purchased the world's capacity for building batteries over the next 5 or 10 years. I mean, the world will go build more capacity, of course. But they have gone out and spent, I mean, Volkswagen alone went out and spent 50 billion euros just purchasing battery capacity. And that's like $60 billion. Right? And so the battery thing is way up in the air. I mean, there's huge dollars chasing it.
Yes.
Which frankly probably squeezes us little guys on the residential end. That's going to squeeze us little people out of getting batteries next week, because somebody else has already purchased the battery.
Yeah,
But anyways, it's a big complex issue, and so I get the fact you had to use something and you used it, but you know, it's not going to keep going that way.
well, and I read an article also that showed what they were projecting batteries to do, and the residential batteries are coming down at a much slower rate than batteries for things like electronics and EVs. So it may well be exactly what you talked about, that those people have bought up the supply, and therefore, there's not as much supply to drive home stuff. And of course, the home batteries typically have some electronics in them and that kind of stuff too. But anyway, the idea here is to give you an idea of what's what. Question?
With virtual net metering, we are allowed to do that. Is that correct or not correct?
No.
We're not allowed. That's just in California.
It may be in some other places, but that's definitely in California.
With the
It's not in Colorado.
Okay, with the existing solar gardens that we have here in the Durango area, are they allowed in the existing structure to put battery storage with those?
That's sort of up in the air too. This whole policy 115 thing that Tri-State has just changed. So I don't know that I can give you a good answer on that.
I'd say no.
I don't think they could touch it behind the meter in your house, for instance. I mean, I don't know about solar gardens, but that's a small component of the local solar production in any event. I mean,
But
I don't think anybody's stopping anybody from putting a battery in their basement.
I think one of the things you need to think about too, when you think about net metering, so we would agree that alternating current electricity isn't stored, right? It's used. But what you're doing with net metering is whatever they produce in excess, they're being able to use at some subsequent point in time. And so there's a pseudo storage in net metering that's not really following the physics of electricity.
Okay. Chris?
I would just offer that I think this is a fairly conservative analysis.
It is. I'm trying to be conservative on all this stuff.
And just
Yes.
so for the rest of the board, I mean, one thing I would suggest is most people wouldn't put in that much battery capacity in a house.
Right.
That's sort of a gold-plated system that's meant to ensure that the generator that you also pay for, you hardly ever run.
Right.
And so what most people would tend to do, I think, is put in one or at most two of those battery systems, run the generator a little more often, conserve a little bit on very cloudy periods, and get away with a third less capital cost than he's got, and so you would cross sooner. The other thing I think we will see long before 2040 is people making use of the extra energy storage capacity in their electric vehicles to back up their house through vehicle to grid. And at that point, you've already bought the battery, you're already driving around in it, why not use it to help store energy in your home? So I wouldn't, if I were LPEA, I wouldn't assume that the day that these two lines cross is that far out.
Okay. I would agree with that. Again, I was trying to be pretty conservative about this. So I went one more because the battery life has come up substantially on the lithium ions batteries. I mean, a few years ago, you couldn't have gotten a 10-year warranty. But the manufacturers are getting to where they can, and it's really the cycles. How many times can you charge and discharge the battery before it's got a problem? So I said, well, what would happen if we changed the 10-year life to a 20-year life? And so the rest, everything else is exactly the same, except we're assuming you only have to swap out the batteries every 20 years instead of 10 years. And so that gives you a little bit different picture. And again, as Chris said, this is kind of a gold-plated system. So now you start to see somewhere out in here, it starts to become economical, and that's kind of at the edge of our 15-year window that we're looking at here. So, who knows? But that's, if in fact the battery life comes up, because, swapping out those batteries is expensive, then it starts to change.
Sorry, Gwen, I was having a conversation with Mike here around EVs and charging, so I kind of missed the transition from the previous slide to this slide. So what are you?
It's just the battery life going to 20 years instead of 10.
Oh, okay.
That's the only difference. And I certainly would expect that Tesla and the rest of them would find ways, they've been finding ways to extend the battery life, and I would guess that would continue. How long it would take them to get to 20, I don't know.
And I'm just going to mention that line that happens is right around when the city is franchise contracts up.
Yeah. So again, I'm not trying to give answers here. I'm trying to show things that could happen and what would the impact be, and so that we can look at these in more detail later as we decide, what's the most important things that affect us. Okay, so we also talked about, what's the potential for rooftop solar? You know, could we potentially have 5% of our members generating rooftop solar? Could it be 95%? And there was an NREL study done in 2016, and this is kind of a map of the entire US saying what percentage of roofs could put solar on them economically. And that would include east and west facing roofs, which as the cost comes down, you can put enough extra panels on the east and west to make up for not having south facing roofs. So it's just the whole thing. So if you look at us, you know, up in here, we're somewhere in the 70 to 90% range. So what NREL is saying is that somewhere between 70 and 90% of our rooftops could economically put on solar. And I will tell you that number is a whole lot higher than I thought it was going to be when we first started looking at this. So, you know, what's the impact of that? If 70% of our members wanted to put solar on, that you have a huge impact.
So Glenn, that's just from the standpoint of suitability to put up panels. It's not necessarily from distance and what it does to the physics and.
No, it's just, you know, do they get enough sunlight, basically, to make it economical to put solar on? Okay, and this is a second report, I mean, it's a second graph from the same report. So what they did was, they showed the potential rooftop PV annual generation from all buildings as a percent of the state's total electricity sales in 2013. So if you look at that, we're this color. So somewhere between 35 and 45% of the entire energy used by the state could potentially come from PV. That would be the maximum. And again, that number is a lot higher than I thought it was going to be. Yes?
So on the slide before this one, you go back.
Yep.
That's the amount of sunshine, but that does not take into consideration the actual physical build of a house. I mean, because I've seen articles where only about a third of the homes can really take solar panels because of the way they're built according to the sun.
Well, that's the part that comes, that number goes up as the cost of the panels goes down. Because what you're looking at is what's economical. When we did the one over in, what was the one we did that, Pagosa, where we actually ended up on the east and west walls. And it's still economical. It's not as economical as if you could get them all south facing, but as the cost of the panels comes down, you can put more panels on the east and west walls to generate the same amount of electricity. So this is assuming that, you know, that's potentially what you could get according to NREL. And I don't know the exact methodology they used. I assume they were also looking at the cost of systems coming down and all that sort of stuff.
It says at the bottom, percentage of small buildings, so that's not really rooftop for residential, that's buildings?
No, it includes residential. So residences are considered small buildings for that purpose.
But it's more than residences. Is what your question is?
What's that?
It's more than residences, is that what your question was?
Yeah, I was
Yeah,
kind
is
of
it
wondering
more?
what
Yeah, I think
exactly
it
that
is.
consisted of.
Yeah, like I say, I mean, you can pull that study down and look at the details. But again, the whole point here was that number is a whole heck of a lot higher than I thought it would be. And the number on the next slide is a whole heck of a lot higher than I thought it would be. So the takeaway is there's not really any sort of physical limit we're going to run into anytime soon in terms of the number of buildings that can have solar on them, or in terms of the percentage of our electricity sales that we can generate via solar.